Hey, this is Tony Shaffer, The Hard Truth, powered by 6 Hour, Never Settle. We're on the American Out Loud Talk Radio Network, and here we are in our latest episode of The Hard Truth. And we have a series of things we want to go through today. Obviously, I want to do a really good shout out to 6 Hour, who I never have I'm never far away from a 6 Hour weapon. Just say it. Whatever you think I mean by that, I mean by that. So today we're going to be joined by our usual suspects, Elizabeth Breckenkamp and Chris Cordani. And then our special guest this week is Senior Fellow from the London Center for Policy Research and Project Sentinel, Tim Furey. So this is going to be a bit of a once over the world, because one of the things we want to do with The Hard Truth is actually try to provide people information that matters without the I guess the editorialization and political wrangling that people tend to do. So Tim, welcome to The Hard Truth.
Always great to be here, Tony.
Yeah. So Tim is someone I admire by the fact that he knows things I have no clue about. And so it's good to have someone who can actually talk in languages which we don't understand. And I'd like him to kind of go through that today and help educate us, because there's some real issues coming up. Some have already been brought up regarding the digital currency market and Bitcoin. And they're not the same. People, I think, tend to throw them in together, and I'd like to have Tim explain that a little bit today. And then also go through the FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried fiasco and what that means for folks and all that. So, Tim, first, give us a little bit about your background. So this is actually radio. I know that we're taping this, so we'll have an audio and visual video version both. But we'd like to have you kind of explain for the audience who you are and how you came to work in the areas you do.
Great. Thanks, Tony. I really appreciate that. So I think I'm a person that wears quite a few hats. So from a professional level, I've spent a lot of years doing investment banking, capital markets, and Wall Street. Worked everywhere from the Fed, Federal Reserve Board of Governors, and in the U.S. central banks, right out of school, to then go into more of a traditional capital markets role. I've been blessed to have been all over the world, worked on all kinds of deals. But at that same time, I always have the passion for freedom, economic development, a lot of the things that make America the great country that it is. So that's one of the things that I knew, obviously the gentleman that formed the London Center, Herb London.
Dr. London,
This is how I met Tony, and then came along with the other great group of patriots that really work with him to really get a lot of these ideas out there. And I work also for Club for Growth, served on a lot of campaigns I've run myself. So kind of been the world between kind of the business and economic side, as well as the public policy and civil rights end of things as well. So wear a lot of hats, but it's a fun time.
So let's take a little sidebar and do the civil rights thing. One of the things I hope you don't mind me mentioning is I would see you out in New York doing things, protesting things with groups which aren't necessarily conservative, but I thought it was great. And I was like, good on you, Tim. You want to talk a little about that? Because I thought there was things that you actually reached out to the other side on, which were legitimately like, these are constitutional issues that everybody should be paying attention to, but people somehow weren't doing it. So,
yeah, I think let's take one example. There's several of them. When we look at, let's say, after the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter, a lot of those protests and things like that. I think from like a Republican and conservative side, this was an incredibly wasted opportunity, right? Because what you were really looking at was this civil war within the Democratic Party. So having gone to, let's say, a lot of those protests in Philadelphia, in New York, and other places like that, and just listening to what people were saying. Yes, you did have some people that were bashing Trump, but other than that, it wasn't really anything against the Republican Party. It was a bunch of these, big state, big police power, a lot of the things that, are core Democratic principles. And so this was an opportunity for a lot of Republicans to come out there and say, hey, look, we're actually, you may never have considered us, but we're actually more ideologically aligned than you thought. I mean, you got that great video of where you had a lot of these the Black Lives Matter movement and the Tea Party people meeting on the national lawn and then getting up on stage, and it's like, well, we're talking about the same thing. I mean,
Right.
even if you look at and I know there's a lot of folks that aren't really into the whole defund the police thing, right? And there's some real problems with that ideology.
Right.
But the whole defund the police that's not something that really came out of this movement. That's a takeoff of the defund the ATF movement that came out of the 90s when you had Ruby Ridge, Waco, where you had a lot of, let's say, white middle America conservatives running around talking about, abuses by police powers. And so from an ideological standpoint, there's a lot more alignment than people think. And to win elections, you have to actually build those coalitions. And I think that's one of the things that at least folks on the right don't really realize of who really their allies are and who they should be speaking to.
Well, we've promoted the outreach, as you know, from day one. And that's one of the reasons I was proud that you bugged me constantly for a while there, Tim, to bring you on. And thank you for doing it, because obviously, I get distracted being a senior citizen and all now. I have to remember where I park my Oldsmobile sometimes. Yeah, but you stuck in there, so thank you. But with that said, no, I think we are obligated as, I think, enlightened conservatives. I don't know if can I use that term, that have recognized that old school conservatism, it's dead. I think we owe it to ourselves to embrace libertarianism, to embrace constitutional issues, even if it makes people uncomfortable. I was at a ball game a few years ago, and I think I've told you this story, but I don't think the audience necessarily has heard it. A college friend, a female friend, I never dated her, just friends, just a colleagues from college. We're sitting at a Washington Nationals game for Wright State University night, where there's alumnus of Wright State. And she obviously knew I was Trump 2020. I was on the campaign at the time. And she looked over at me, says, well, you guys are really frightening people with all this pro Second Amendment talk. And I looked at her as like, how do we frighten people by trying to encourage people to use their right? Well, I have black friends who are actually talking about getting guns. I said, what? Well, you don't understand. These people may arm up. It's like, do you understand how racist what you just said really is? Tim, I mean, seriously, it's like, how do you not listen to what you just said?
Well, there's certain things, and having spent a great deal of time going within the civil rights movement and understanding progressive narratives and things like that, I can tell you there are certain forms of racism that are still very much accepted. Saying that people of color are fundamentally more violent, that they should not have the same Second Amendment rights, things like that, is still very much tolerated. And then once I'm sure you raised that issue, she probably demurred and kind of disappeared, because I've had that issue too, where you'll have tropes that basically say, well, we think it's okay in a rural environment, but not an urban one. Well, do you think voting rights should be different in an urban environment versus a rural one? So,
well, and the other thing,
very good point.
Well, 2 points while we're on this subject before we get back to crypto. We're going to be all over the map today, folks. Is the whole idea that the left has used gun control as, we just want to do this because it's safe. It creates safer conditions, which is the opposite. It's really fundamentally based on Jim Crow. Basically, goes back to the late, I think it was probably the late 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, where obviously Southern whites did not want, by the way, Southern white Democrats did not want black newly freed individuals from having guns. And I think anytime I see a minority come out and say, trying to create conditions for people to have more access to Second Amendment rights is fascism and racism, I just scratch my head, because nothing could be further from the truth. Do you want to touch on that for a minute, or is that something you want to stay away from?
Yeah, you don't really necessarily see, unless they're the politicians, a lot of people of color that go out about it. Usually you see about a bunch of white progressives doing that, right? Because again, there is a lot.
There was a guy in Florida just recently who came out against DeSantis's constitutional carry idea, saying it was fascist and I mean, I tweeted it. It's on my Twitter.
I think a lot of these people don't even know what that whole fascism even means anymore.
That's what I use.
I mean, look, I'm not exactly one of the biggest proponents of constitutional carry. I know that there's people within even our organization that have differing opinions on that. But
Right.
to say fascism is crazy. I mean, look, you're looking at licensing schemes in places like where I'm originally from, New York City, and Boston, things like that are explicitly designed to discriminate against people of color, members of the LGBTQ community, anybody that's considered undesirable, and they're still on the books. Yeah. And the one of the, if you ever want to, because I like to win arguments really quickly, and one of the things to say, it's like, all right, if these aren't discriminatory, would you apply the same standards to voting? And of course, that just closes the conversations right there, because they know it is, right? I mean, I published an article, I think it was a year or so ago, the gun control movement's Black Lives Matter problem. Because if you look at everything that movement stands for, it's everything that's the antithesis of what the gun control movement's about, and they don't like to talk about it. I mean, you think about all of these issues of like progressivism and things like that, and all it's very much based on racial this and racial that, except for gun control, where all of a sudden nobody wants to talk about any of the issues of equity and discrimination and things like that. It just magically disappears.
Right. So, and then just again to remind our audience, we are actually sponsored by Sig Sauer and Never Settle. And obviously, I'm pro-gun. Just saying, because I carry them. Just for the audience to know, I actually carried Sig Sauer in combat, and when it matters, or to me, having a weapon available, Sig is always my choice. And you will see me always out and about with a Sig. Let's continue our conversation on this, because I think it's important, Tim, for people to understand that the left has, I think, hijacked many concepts that should have been used to promote freedom, to include freedom not only of speech, which I would argue they're kind of doing some things to damage that right now, but the Second Amendment, I think, is linked to the First Amendment. And with that said, one of the things that they use often in using their First Amendment right is the term assault weapon or assault rifle. And I've been in the military. I was in the military for 30 and a half years. I'm now officially retired. Got the ID card and free medical care to prove it. But my point being is that term itself is, or it comes from the term Sturmgewehr. Sturmgewehr was the name given by Adolf Hitler to the STG 4445, which was essentially a rifle that had both a selector on it. You could go from single fire to machine, basically automatic. That selector switch obviously made it into a machine gun by the fact you could turn it onto that. I don't understand how people don't understand that essentially they've adopted a term created by Adolf Hitler to promote their very severe concepts and restrictions of disarming the American public. Why do we allow this to happen, where they use literally a term pinned by Adolf Hitler as the promotional point of their policy to disarm the American public?
Well, I think the problem is on the gun control lobby, there's a ton of ignorance on that side. There's very little knowledge of even how guns function.
That's true.
I don't understand how people who it's their jobs, like, what do these guys do all day, right? How do they not get educated, watch some YouTube videos? This isn't all that complicated, right? Mm-hmm. And they're still going around not knowing, which end of the gun the bullet goes in. I mean, these are actual things that I've seen. I mean, I give one of my favorite examples, a little bit dated, but Dianne Feinstein just announced her retirement. She's up there at one of the biggest advocates for decades of gun safety, and she literally almost murdered a bunch of reporters and her colleagues with an AK-47. And this is all on film. It's all out there. There's no conspiracy theories out there. And yet she was never charged at all with this. I think the other one we're talking about now, let's say, common sense gun law is probably the biggest one is Hunter Biden, right? And I think we'll talk about segue into a little bit more of this later. But he certainly committed multiple gun crimes, right? So forget anything they did with the meth or any of the misogyny or any of all these other things. This is black and white felony gun crimes that he did. Gun crimes that, if throwing a loaded gun away in a garbage can, you could have had a kid find that, or somebody, how is this being covered up? And so when we talk about issues of, let's say, white supremacy or white privilege, or I mean, that's Hunter Biden is violations of gun laws, things like that. But again, these are things that few people really want to grab and run with and ask those hard questions.
Well, that's the hard question and hard truth is why we're here right now. So that's clearly what we're trying to get to the bottom of. And to that point, though, we probably won't have time to explore it to the level I would like today. But clearly, Tim, you brought up the point of a clear violation of federal law. If you or I did what Hunter was accused of, there's no doubt that we would be incarcerated, processed, probably out on bail, fighting for our professional lives based on the fact that we violated the ATF rules. And this is something that I do want to touch base on a little bit before we get to crypto. We got to get to cryptocurrency, but I promise the audience we will. The ATF and this whole brace issue. Boy, I shake my head every time I look at that ruling. That ruling is so badly written. Technically, I can see where people could say, well, I'm not going to comply because the thing I do, the brace I use actually helps me do what it was designed to do, which is help brace the firearm, and I can't put it on my shoulder. And it's very, in many ways, in my judgment, vague. I mean, it's not really clearly written. And to me, the idea that a piece of plastic is somehow so powerful, literally a piece of plastic that goes on the back of a firearm is so powerful, so dangerous that they now have to essentially take and make something that I think over at least 30 million Americans have as a common use weapon. It's going to now be illegal to possess without registration. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so I've actually spent way too many years of my life actually looking at all the nuances of these firearms laws over time.
Yeah.
So I actually haven't read that particular ruling. I know what you're talking about, but let me just say this, because I think that one of the ways the NRA has just issued a lawsuit, I think yesterday on this, but let's look at this from a progressive standpoint here, right? We have now been inundated with all this talks about criminal justice reform, right?
Right.
How are we have this nationwide system where we have more prisoners than any other developed country in the world, right? All these people that are going to jail, filling the jails, private prisons, not being rehabilitated, all of this stuff, being abused, coming out, worse criminals they went on. And now you have a ruling that takes people that have already passed background checks, let's say 30 million of them,
right,
already passed background checks. We already assume that they're a good guy, because otherwise, if it wasn't for this brace, they could still own the gun legally. And yet now we're going to incarcerate them for non-violent offenses. Like, this is absolutely insane. And people should go to, and again, this is the ATF is not a legislative ruling, but any legislator behind this, you should be being hit with, why are you trying to fill our prisons? And this is a prime example of this. This is why, again, if you want to, the easiest way to solve the prison problem, right, is to be preventative with it, right? Let's look at our laws and let's get rid of the BS laws that don't need to be there, so that you keep people out of the prison industrial complex, right?
Right.
And then you get this, and then you're like, how did this happen? How is the Biden administration now looking to put tens of millions of more Americans through the prison cycle, right? We didn't see Donald Trump do this, but Joe Biden is trying to do this. And then the reason what we have to do is then start taking these, these thought processes and getting them to the advocates of the people of prison reform, so that they're voting for people who are actually for the policies that they believe in, and not just, they're all about it, but then wind up voting for the wrong people. And that's where the policy has to go.
So to that point, just to use an example of what you're talking, obviously there was a shooting in Michigan. 3 people were murdered by a guy named Anthony McRae. He was, I guess, 43. Notably, of course, the politicians are all screaming, "Oh, we need to take people's guns." To that point, this guy was actually arrested for a felony gun charge back in 2019, but they let him go. So, you look back on this by, of course, a Democrat. It was a Democrat judge. So, Tim, my point is like, some of these people clearly cannot safely own a firearm. So maybe that should be our focus, not going after 30 million people who clearly have passed background checks and safely own firearms, right? I mean, I've got guns in my house right now. I'm pretty sure they're not going to go off randomly and just start shooting people. Yeah, someone has to pick it up and do it. As a matter of fact, we're going to be doing a show soon about the Alec Baldwin trigger thing. You know, triggers just don't pull themselves. But that's my point, is that there is a difference between legal gun ownership with those who actually understand how to properly use and protect them, and then some guy who's a felon who basically is caught with on a felony gun charge, but they just let him go. It's like, oh yeah, no big deal. And then he offends again. And then of course they're surprised. Like, oh, we didn't see this coming. The guy was charged with a felony in 2019. You let him go.
Yeah.
So clearly it seems to me they want chaos, because it's not the gun. It's not the guys who own the gun legally. It's the criminal who has essentially a criminal record, who should be the one focused on. And again, it's not a black or white thing. Criminals are criminals. Criminals come in all flavors, sizes, and beliefs. So it should be focused on those who offend, not those who don't offend. What do you say on that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think even taking a step back, you look at these things. One of the easiest ways to fix this problem is that you got to get the gun control lobby has got to stop hiring idiots of people who just clearly have no idea what they're doing. They were probably some congressional staff or somewhere, and an opening came up and they joined in this. They know nothing about firearms, nothing about any of these things. Because when you do have incidents happen, there may be certain policies that could actually create real lasting change and prevent future tragedies from happening. But because these people have no idea what they're doing, it's all let's ban guns and put people in jail and all this other nonsense.
Yeah.
And again, then you run into the problem, as you were highlighting, and this is something that was very, very much clear under the Obama administration, where they were trying to pass all these common sense laws, but at the same time weren't enforcing the ones that were already out there.
Right.
So what is really the point of this, unless you are now creating a system where all of these gun owners are in violation, or a violation could be found, but now you're selectively enforcing it over perhaps on geography, perhaps on communities or whatever it is, and that's like a Soviet style way of doing things, and that's not something we should be instituting here.
Well,
we should have policies that work, that save lives, and that really honor the constitutional values that make America the great place it is.
Well, that's why, obviously I appreciate and admire you and your courage for being able to actually speak up about this. As someone who's not my age, we'll just leave it that way. You're someone coming out of this from a completely fresh approach, and I appreciate youthful folks like you looking at this and understanding that this is worth fighting for and reestablishing. So
Absolutely.
We're getting low on time for our first half of the show. We'll have to take a break here in a few minutes, but let's jump in. We've got a little bit less than 5 minutes to talk a little bit about crypto versus Bitcoin. So in just a couple of minutes, what's the difference between Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and why does that matter?
So one of the problems is within this whole ecosystem, what we call like Web3, right? Web 2 being like traditional internet, an internet that's curated by major companies, Google, Apple, Amazon, any of these companies. Web3 is supposedly decentralized. You don't have major centralized actors. Everybody owns their own data, their own content, and are equal participants in the network. So that's why we call Web3. And Web3 started with its original entry was Bitcoin, right? And Bitcoin came about at a time when you had the mortgage crisis, where you've had people throughout the world who haven't been able to trust their own country, their own currencies, whether you're looking at Zimbabwe, Argentina, Germany, all of these other places. This isn't something that we in the U.S. have had acutely, but has been more of an issue. But then during this time was a big deal in the U.S. with regards to all the money was being spent, the devaluation of the dollar versus other foreign currencies, and there was also this nexus combination of advancements in cryptography and other ways where you could actually have this token, this Bitcoin, that was originally supposed to be a currency, hence the name cryptocurrency,
right?
That all the actors can participate in, The network itself expanded, the Bitcoin supply expanded based on mathematical algorithms that every participant knew. It wasn't based on the Fed or some politician or some other inflationary metric that, was outside of the participants' knowledge. And so it was supposed to be this tool to transfer value and transact in a way that wasn't corrupted by any kind of outside forces. And so that's kind of what Bitcoin was, and Bitcoin was the first. But now there's literally thousands of other tokens within the Web3 ecosystem that do all kinds of various different things. For, let's say, like I just happen to be wearing the shirt Filecoin, decentralized storage. There's other ones for decentralized internet or decentralized networks, decentralized cloud computing, all of these things out there. And yes, a lot of these projects and a lot of these tokens will go to zero. You will see a lot of failure, just like with any startup ecosystem. But we believe that it's going to be a real competitor to the centralized systems going forward. And the technology, again, has only been around since around late 2009. And even then, you've seen massive leaps and bounds in its development. So again, the jury's still out, and we're still in the first or second inning of this. But there's a lot more to come.
So at that point, and we'll have to take a break here in about a minute. I want to explore some more issues relating to how this actually does link to freedom. The concept here, I think, in many ways, Tim, is the idea that individuals should not have to depend on government and governance for their wealth and values. Is that a good summary of kind of what's going on behind this?
Absolutely. And just as a segue into, I think what we'll talk about next is this is what's becoming more of a problem, because all of these things are cute when you got a couple guys in, an internet cafe doing it. But then when you start having multi-million-dollar growth and asset managers getting involved in big companies and instituted players now being threatened, now it starts being something that the governments have to address.
And that's what we're going to talk about in part two of the show, is how things have gotten interesting, to say the least, with certain people playing certain roles on the big international stage regarding the future of cryptocurrency. So anyways, Tony Shaffer, this is The Hard Truth. We're going to take a quick break. Just a reminder, we are actually broadcast on the America Out Loud Talk Network. Great to have them as our flagship outlet. And also, we are powered by 6 Hour. Never settle. All right, we'll be back very soon. Welcome back. This is The Hard Truth with Tony Shaffer, part two. Today, we are, as always, on the America Out Loud Radio Network. We're happy to be here and providing the network and the American people good, solid information that is often very hard and very true, just saying. And then we are powered by 6 Hour. My friends at 6 Hour never settle. And I never settle, and nor should you. Always go with SIG if you're going to select a firearm to protect yourself. So here we are, part two. We are joined, part two, with Elizabeth Breckenkamp, an excellent producer and on-air person that's going to be going through things with us today, and as Chris Cordani, our executive producer and senior tech, who does the magic. And how he does it, I don't know, but boy, he does. And then our guest today is a senior fellow from both the London Center and Project Sentinel, is Tim Furey. Tim, again, welcome back to The Hard Truth. And let's just jump right into it, because we were just going through and trying to explain to the good folks crypto versus Bitcoin. Can you just give us because Elizabeth, how did you phrase your question tonight? Because I think you actually had a curiosity about that. If you could restate the question for the audience.
Oh, basically, I was saying that I think the average American hears about Bitcoin and they hear cryptocurrency. They don't really understand what the difference is. You can research it all day long on Google, DuckDuckGo, but it's still, I think for the average American, they're trying to figure out, if I can't physically touch it, how do I know it's stable? How is it really going to benefit me? And so I think people want to know what the difference is between Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, which is more stable, which is more trustworthy.
Got it. So it's kind of a complicated question, because cryptocurrency, I would say, is an old term for an entire classification of these digital assets, of which Bitcoin was the first and is still the biggest with regards to the amount of money that's been put into it. And Bitcoin itself was meant as a currency. It was meant to be a replacement or a addition to the US dollar, the Japanese yen, Whereas the original inventors thought that, you could basically have this exchange of value on your phone, and you can go and use it to, buy coffee or do anything else. And they would actively try to get this adoption. Now, things have changed with the massive run up of the value of Bitcoin. It's more of like a digital gold than a digital dollar. But again, there's nothing backing the US currency either, right? And so Bitcoin has this certain mystique about it, is in that it's this currency that's outside of government control. It's controlled by mathematical algorithm that and not some, the politician du jour. And so a lot of people have attributed a lot of value to this, and has driven the price up to, into the high 60,000s. Now, the price, of course, then goes up and down in these market cycles. But over the long run, you have seen the token appreciate. Now, of course, just because something's gone up over a certain period of time doesn't mean it'll, continue going up. This is basic investing 101. But, it's not necessarily that, let's say, the value of Bitcoin is so great. It's the value of the dollar is so awful, right? If you had held on to your dollars over the past few decades, you'd be down, 90 something percent, right? So Bitcoin tried to, really is an advent to, get around all these problems, not controlled by the government. And then it was, obviously the market's adopted. Now you have institutions buying it. You have, hedge funds. You have even talk of like retirement funds getting small positions into it. So who knows where this grand experiment winds up going? But there has been market adoption so far. Now, to the question of versus other cryptocurrencies, there are all kinds of other tokens out there that do all kinds of things. Some are very complex. Some are as simple as, let's say, one of the ones that we at the LTX work with is Filecoin, which is for decentralized file storage, right? So instead of using Amazon or one of these big centralized entities that can come around and, let's say, like with Parler, and then just cancel your website because they cancel your ability to manage your data, this is all decentralized. They can't, the network can't discriminate, right? So there's all kinds of use cases for that. Now, I would say, though, that there's a lot of people talking about these things as getting rich quick schemes, and a lot of it was based on people, using the, the wonderful wide world of the internet here, been able to raise a lot of money very quickly on these token projects, right? With little more than potentially an idea or a plan or what we call a white paper, right? And so a lot of people did get rich getting in early on a lot of these things. I would not advocate anybody jumping in, because a lot of this on a lot of these, what they call altcoins, because there's thousands of these things, and you're right, maybe you get it and it doubles in a week, right? Or you could lose all your money in a week. So a lot of these things just wind up becoming gambling. Some projects are scams or garbage or won't go anywhere. But there is a lot of work and a lot of smart people that are coming into the space and see the potential of building out these networks. And again, this is only an entire ecosystem that's about 10 years old. So, the potential is still there, but we're not sure where this is going to end up yet.
So, Tim, to that, to follow up that directly, to your point regarding political issues relating to investment, Sam Bankman-Fried, you can't talk about this without mentioning Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX. A lot of folks think that was, to your point, a pump and dump scheme where essentially it was all high risk, very little prospects of return. They hired huge names like Larry David to do the promotion. That quarterback guy that retired, which I don't want to bring his name up because we'll offend listeners probably in some audiences because he's retiring again, just saying. And then basketball players and everything else, basically trying to create this illusion of trust to get hard currency and then issue them quote unquote tokens. And then those tokens became essentially backed somewhat by currency, but not really, because they could just basically make tokens out of thin air. It's like, oh yeah, we've got 1 million tokens and they're worth X. They could assign their own value. That's dangerous to me. It's like, even I'm not a crypto guy and I'm not an economist, but man, someone with unlimited authority kind of assign value to their own tokens. That's not a good idea, is it? I mean, it seems to me they got in a lot of trouble pretty quick by doing that.
Yes. So let me take a step back, and then I'll I'll get into the whole FTX and
because I think that people need to regain confidence that people like you know what you're doing, and that was an anomaly. Just saying. So.
Got it. So one of the things, the use cases for these decentralized systems is to revolutionize finance, right? Like if I'm going to send, I can send a Bitcoin from my wallet, from my phone, the wallet on my phone, to somebody in Japan in minutes, right, or seconds. Whereas otherwise, this could take hours and all kinds of headaches and all kinds of fees and all this other stuff, and it's a real nightmare, right? That's a very simple explanation, but there's all kinds of other financial use cases and tools and lending and all kinds of things and trading that this technology is already revolutionizing, right? And so this has created a lot of problems within the SEC and a lot of other branches of government that kind of see this as a threat to the current regulatory environment. It used to be more that even the private sector, the banks were against this because obviously, if you don't have to use let's say their wire services to transfer value from point A to point B, they're losing a lot of money. And most banks are not going out there making the bulk of their revenues because they're making investments in companies or this or that or making speculatory plays. They make it off these fees.
Right.
A point here, 2 points there. That's where the bulk of Wall Street's revenues run from. And look, they love that more than they would do that day and night versus, let's say, buying stock in some new company, right?
Because that's a venture, not
That's kind of the broader ecosystem.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
So in the U.S., and I also wrote a piece on this. It's called "Is the U.S. Blowing It on Blockchain?" that was published in National Review. Of the U.S. has very successfully used its securities laws as a way to really hamper the industry domestically, right? So a lot of the creators have left to go to greener pastures in Europe or abroad. I mean, there's a saying that the whole Web3 economy is American entrepreneurs living in Europe making on Asian capital that are solving problems in Latin America and Africa. And the U.S. is really missing out on it in a way that, let's say, if you look at how we really captured Web 2 with regard to Silicon Valley and being at the forefront of the internet, I mean, think about how much economic value that's added to the country. Now, imagine that had been birthed in China or France or somewhere else, right? And so that's at a real risk of happening here. So that's kind of the backdrop. And where you have this economic, this problem where the regulators are actually disincentivizing American companies to be here, you wind up going into this SBF problem, where when he set up the company FTX, his trading organization, he did it offshore. He did it in the Bahamas, right? And so this is part of the problem too, in that you didn't really have any, it was kind of an arm's length distance away. And the guy who ran at SBF, or Sam Bankman-Fried, he was the guy who had made a lot of money trading Bitcoins across countries and basically built up his trading outfit into like a major platform. If you think of like E-Trade or Ameritrade or any of these other companies, Schwab, that's pretty much what he built up. And then what happened is he also created his own token out of this token FTT, which supposedly, gave you rights to, let's say, trading fee discounts or other kind of benefits for using it on the network. So think about any of the membership rewards that you use at, let's say, Sam's Club or Costco or something like that. So kind of a similar mindset, but it's a little bit more liquid in that he could trade those FTT tokens. He could use those as collateral. There was a assigned dollar value based on these secondary market exchanges, right? You don't quite really do that with your Costco membership, right? You can't use that as, let's say, collateral for a loan or something, but he was able to do that. And I think basically what happened wasn't really necessarily something that was unique to crypto. He was having issues and taking depositor money or people who had trading accounts with him, taking that money and filling the holes in the business with investor or traders funds. So he's using other people's money to fill the holes in his domestic business, right? And that's not new to crypto. That's been going on for decades. I mean, you look at Bernie Madoff was similar. Some of the other big banks that got in trouble did similar things. Like, there was not that, in the U.S. regulatory system, if you're a broker dealer or investment bank, you have to have your customer funds segregated, right? You can't go in there and pay your electric bills based on Elizabeth's personal trading account, right? That's a real no-no. And that's effectively what he did. Now, what also made him very interesting was that he used a lot of this money to gain political favor. And so he was running around, seeding a lot of politicians, proposing regulatory changes that he was personally working to usher in, which of course would create a benefit for his company because he would have all the special keys to get whatever access to getting past these markets that were necessary. So
well,
it was a pure regulatory capture type situation. And then he got caught in a run on the bank and the whole thing blew up. The emperor had new clothes, and now he's facing a lot of time in jail.
Well, the thing about Madoff, though, is he was a legit guy for a long time. He was he was trusted. He did the right thing for a while, and it just kind of snowballed after that because he figured, hey, he just stepped over the line a little bit, and it just kept getting worse and worse. But people trusted him because he was a legit guy. He didn't come out of nowhere. He wasn't a tech that came out of nowhere. He was with NASDAQ. He was a big wig in the legit investing field. That's the big difference between what people might be scared of when it comes to Bitcoin and why they trusted somebody like Bernie Madoff.
But let me just say this. Well, number one, with Madoff, he actually was running an illegal money managing firm. Like he was basically at two parallel businesses. He had the one that was the very legit, and he was certainly one of the titans of Wall Street. But he was always running this illegal money manager firm that was unlicensed and everything, even from his early days. And this just kept it going. And at one point, when his margins up here got compressed, he relied more and more on the illegal business. But it was very strange that even when he was killing it up top, he was still running this thing. But yeah, I mean, the parallels with SBF and the FTX collapse are pretty crazy. And one of the other interesting things because there's tons of unfortunately funny things coming out of this story is that he gave a lot of money to the politicians, right? And so all these politicians decided, this is stolen other people's money. And a lot of these guys thought, well, we're going to donate it to charity, right? So which is
that makes it right.
The same case as if somebody goes in and robs your house, steals your TV and your electronics and your grandma's jewelry, takes it to your local politician, and instead of them giving back to you, they're going to give it to their favorite charity to gather favor. So I think any of these politicians that did that, really you need to look at them, but these are not trustworthy people, because that is just an insane thing to do, especially after you found out that this guy stole the money. And instead of saying, hey, let's figure out how we're going to get it back to these people, your attitude is, let's donate it to one of my favorite charities, who I bet you in almost every one of those cases have endorsed that politician or in other ways. Of
course. It's exactly. Power. So, but to that point, Tim, it was very clear that SBF was seeking to essentially shut the barn door behind him, to basically allow his pump and dump scheme and kind of his view of how crypto should work to be protected by the very regulations that would prevent others from having the access to the market and freedom, especially regarding tracking of currency and oversight by the Federal Reserve and other organizations. So how do you prohibit? How do you stop that next time from having someone like a CZ or a SBF coming in and saying, "Oh, yeah, you're right. We're a dirty, awful lot, and we need to be regulated, and therefore I'm here to help you regulate as long as you don't regulate me." Essentially, that's what he was trying to do, from what I could tell.
Yes. So one thing that it's also worth noting too is that, a lot of people within the crypto community are rather like-minded they're just kind of inherently more, freedom, individual rights oriented. So a lot of them looked at SBF and saw a lot of things that he was doing and was like, wait a minute, this is the entire type of thing that we got into this industry, that we built this out to get away from this BS. And the other thing is SBF wasn't really a crypto guy. He was a trader, a regular.
No, he's an arbitrage guy.
Yeah, he was at a company called Jane Street Capital.
Right.
And he even said he would have traded orange futures versus crypto if he could make as much money. So he's not really even a crypto guy. He was just a grifter that found a good opportunity. Maybe he was a great trader and made a lot of money off it.
Yeah, nobody was falling for tulips anymore anyway. So.
Yeah, exactly. But Tony, the thing you're talking about, this whole what they call regulatory capture, where the big industry comes in and either gets laws passed that only they can abide by, or winds up currying favor with members of the regulators, giving them jobs over time, and winds up being buddy and buddy. I mean, that's just inherent across all industries. So one of the ways to look at it, and again, now, I do work with Club for Growth as well, is that the easiest way to unburden, right, society and new entrants to businesses from these type of things is to try to keep regulation as limited as possible. Now, what SBF basically did was fraud, and fraud is generally pretty absolute, across all the boards, right? Like you can have where governments, states can raise money and do whatever they want for municipal financing. The government can't get involved unless it's fraud, right? Like we have a real strong standard in the US that fraud is fraud, and there's not really too many exceptions for it, right? So these are the things that we have to look at and spend more time going after the people that misrepresent themselves and blow the businesses up for the wrong reasons, and less time trying to hinder growth of companies and harass people.
Right.
Like,
so I got
again,
one last question. We got to go to the next part of the show, but I got one last very serious question for you, Tim, and answer however you wish. But does Sam Bankman-Fried smell as bad as he looks? I mean, does he smell like week-old Cheetos?
That dude needs a serious haircut.
And essentially a 5-day-old underwear that's been sitting, next to the bat. I mean, is that the? I mean, I don't know these things because I don't hang out with them. Man, it's like, man, I can smell you from the video, for God's sake. I mean,
what's up with that hair?
I've never met the guy. I've known a lot of very, very brilliant tech guys, but I gotta say though, it's an industry and a community that's not exactly going to be featured in GQ anytime soon.
Invest in soap and a comb or something. That would be pretty nice. If you have all money, a little bit of a Zest body soap and maybe
just shave that whole thing off.
Really nice. And I'll explain that very simple. Like if you're going to be a lawyer or something like that, or a doctor or something, for the most part, right? You got to show up to work. You got to be somewhat presentable and all these other things, right? This is an entire community for decades that makes a stupid amount of money sitting at home, and they'll show up and like, look, I'll completely, they'll show up at a meeting in sandals and jorts and say that, look, I can build you your website and do all this functionality in a week and get it done and debug it and all this stuff like that. I'll do whatever I want, and I'm going to go back to my cave now. So
it's like the dude from Big Lebowski with money.
That's kind of what I do. Oh boy. Oh, anyway.
All right, here we go.
We do have a new segment. We have the new segment for the Hard Truth with Tony Shaffer on the America Out Loud Radio Network. And here it is. It's Tony's take. We're going to find out what's going on around the world and get your take on it. We have a few minutes left for this one.
All right.
First, big announcement this week. Nikki Haley running for president. There was some laughs, but I got to tell you, I believe she's a serious contender. She has name recognition and likability. The likability is something that the current front runner who's done a great job as president may not have amongst independents.
Well, I think she's clearly focused on trying to get someone's attention so she'll be their vice presidential pick, but she has no chance. I mean, come on. Nikki Haley, I've met the woman, nothing against her. It's just, there's three things that I think there's going to be a problem with. First, who's the constituency she's really going for? During the time she was around Trump, she would say things kind of opposing the candidate, as you just point out, Chris. I mean, it's like, she wasn't like on board with some of the things he was doing. Her leadership in South Carolina, while notable, wasn't like groundbreaking, and that I don't think she's a Ron DeSantis. She didn't do things which really drew national attention in a good way. And third, I don't think the big donors are going to be behind her. I just don't see that. I just don't see her being the ball of energy that that has the personality to carry through and go forward. So that's my assessment. Over to you guys on this. Don't be shy.
Look, I think that she is one, and there's obviously several other contenders jumping in. But I think that, stepping back, I think she's somebody that definitely is worthy to be in the arena. And I have to say, and I don't think I've ever said this before, I think that what you'll wind up with is an entire slate of very qualified candidates. And I think Haley does deserve the respect of being somebody that can be on the presidential scene. And I think you'll see a lot more of it. And I think this really bodes well for the GOP. And I don't think the Democrats can really say that right now. I think the Democrats have a real problem where they're going with the exit of kind of the old school folks like, the Bidens and Feinsteins of the world, and a kind of radicalized firebrands at their base who I don't know if they have any kind of, and I hope they don't have any kind of national ability to draw real mass appeal, because a lot of what they say is absolutely crazy. I mean, you just had
literally crazy. Yeah.
You had 161 Democrats who I think voted to allow non-citizens to vote in DC elections. I mean, what we talk about? Yes, the Republican Party certainly has some firebrands and crazies in it, but again, you can kind of count and point them out, right? You can list them. The problem with the Democrats is they have a massive amount of their core body that are like, I cannot believe you just voted for that.
Yeah.
And I'm not speaking as, let's say, some staunch conservative or something, but somebody that basically knows how things work. And I watched how New York has declined because of the craziness.
Tim, you're not staunch. You're good.
But we're actually talking about whether she can win or not, and what we think of her.
All right, next question, Chris.
Bill Clinton couldn't win either, but here we go. Here's another question for you.
Okay. Bill Clinton. It's I don't want to talk about.
Right. I know what I'm saying. Is also ran sometimes come out of nowhere.
Pain, Chris. I feel your pain. Can I feel your pain, Chris?
Elon Musk was at the World Government Summit.
He was.
Yes, he was. And he criticized the concept of world government, telling it right to their faces. This is another guy. Him and Donald Trump are guys with a lot of money that don't mind being excluded from this playground and telling them, okay, you don't want to play with us. We don't like what you're doing. What's your take on that?
So I think I often, from just watching this, I did watch this morning, as a matter of fact, not knowing this was coming up. And my impression was Groucho Marx once said, I would not be a member of any club that would take me as a member. And that's the way I think Musk kind of presented it. It's like, I don't want to be in your club, and too much power is not a good thing, right? I mean, am I wrong here? No, it's like, hey, dude, thanks for letting me speak to you, but I'm not in on this. I'm not on board. What do you all think?
That's a great point.
I got another one for you. We have about a minute left. James Clapper walked back on signing that 50 that letter with 50 intelligence officials saying the Hunter laptop or the Hunter Biden laptop was not real. He's walking back on that. I'm sure you have a lot to say about him. If we can try to squeeze that in 30 seconds.
Yeah. So, I've been in the room with him several times, and he does smell like Munster cheese. If you can like imagine Munster,
him and Sam
I think it's the dome. I think it's
the
shiny thing that just gives off like cheese.
Oh,
so Jimmy Clapper, and by the way, I've got a piece of paper. You can check it out on Twitter. He promoted me to GS-12. I actually put it out there when I was a very young operative over in the Air Force. So I know the man. It's not like I can walk away from it. I got to tell you, out of all the generals I've briefed and interacted with, he's got to be probably the dumbest of all of them and most political. He has made all of his hay by being completely pliable and bereft of any ethics or an idea of trying to live up to his oath of office. I hope Jim hears this, because I would love to debate him on all the stuff I personally know he did or did not do. And this whole idea is like, oh, yeah, we signed this letter, but we really didn't mean it was like seriously Russian propaganda. We just thought we meant to say it might be looking like Russian propaganda if I ever knew what Russian propaganda was, because I don't know what it is. So I'm just commenting because, someone gave me this letter to sign. That's what he did. And I'm just telling you, Jim Clapper is all that is wrong with the national security bureaucracy. People who will mitigate their personal views for propositioning the politicians above them to promote them and be part of a political narrative rather than part of the American Republic, which he's actually signed up to support. It's very bad, and this is as tragic as it gets. It was political and election interference by a man who should be in jail for violating U.S. citizens' rights regarding illegal surveillance. But what do I know? I'm only a retired intelligence officer.
And let me just say,
we do know it's time to end the show, though.
So I know we got to go. I know it was great. So, it's been a great show. Let me thank our participants: Elizabeth Breckenkamp, She is vivacious and lovely, and if you can't see her on the radio, shame on you. You should check out our video then too. And then obviously Chris Cordani is the extraordinary producer of our program. If it wasn't for him, you'd be listening to me, I don't know where. So Chris is able to do this. And of course, last but not least, Tim Furey. Tim, thank you for helping us go through, I think, what would be described as a very practical understanding of the Second Amendment and some of the issues and rhetoric which is now being kind of thrown about. And then crypto and Bitcoin. I really do appreciate your time today. And I know I said this in the pre-interviews, like I wanted to talk to you about all this stuff anyway. So it's so convenient that we actually get to share it with the audience. So thanks again for being here. And thank you all, the audience, for being here. This has been The Hard Truth with Tony Shaffer. We are powered by 6 Hour, never settle. And then we are on the America Out Loud Radio Network as our primary venue and presenter of our information. So thanks for being with us today, and we'll be back again with you next week.
I woke up in a derelict delirium to a stranger's kiss and a